Hello, I'm Kate Ball and I'm the founder of Mini First Aid. Welcome to our podcast, Family Health by Mini First Aid. It's great to hear that you've been enjoying our new Family Health podcast series where we will continue to bring you top family health advice from our leading experts. So this week is a bit different to our usual podcast, folks, because I'm joined by writer Jackie Burton and I'm going to be chatting. In fact, Jackie's going to be interviewing me about stroke. And I'm going to be talking about my own experience with my lovely dad, because I know just how firsthand stroke can affect the whole family and the long road to recovery that it takes the whole family on. Series 1 of Family Health by Mini First Aid podcast is sponsored by Savlon Scar Prevention Gel. Savlon Scar Prevention Gel helps soothe pain, promote faster healing, as well as reducing the risk of scarring when used on minor wounds, superficial burns and grazes. With 6 children in my house, scrapes and cuts are plentiful, so my first aid box saviour is Savlon Scar Prevention Gel.
Well, thanks for joining me today. I know that you've got a lot going on at Mini First Aid at the moment, not least this new adult class. But I just wanted to speak to you a little bit more about family, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
And more specifically about your mum and dad. Yeah. Can you tell me first of all a little bit more about your mum and dad?
About my mum and dad.
Yes.
So my mum and dad live in Bristol, which is where I was brought up. I don't think they'll ever forgive me for living in Leeds, so far away from them.
They're not tempted to move up here?
Yeah, I think we're trying hard to persuade them, but life is good in Bristol for them. Right. And my mum has had a career that's had quite a lot of variety. She was a primary school teacher. Right up until when I was born. Then she ran her own business, doing children's music classes, which if she'd done anything franchise-wise with now could be huge. She was ahead of her time. And then actually in later life she became a Baptist minister, so she trained to be a vicar. And she went to ministerial college, trained to be a minister, and had a number of churches in Bristol where she led the services and funerals and weddings and what have you. And she's now retired. And then my dad has always worked in the postal industry.
Right. He's a bit of an entrepreneur though, isn't he?
He is. Yeah, that's right. So he was on the board of the directors of a big postal firm, and then he had an idea,
right?
As you always do, entrepreneurs, and he set up a postal consultancy business, right. Which he sold a few years back and has now retired from. But I guess both him and actually thinking about it with my mum and her running her business as well, is that there's always been that entrepreneurial influence for me from my mum and dad.
Yeah. But so it's what you grow up now.
Yeah, absolutely. But they're still just like my regular mum and dad, that told me off when I was a kid, and now we have a lovely relationship, and hopefully I do them proud.
Oh, I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
I'm sure you do. Does your dad sort of try and give you advice about running a business?
Absolutely. I mean, as in we enlist his advice. So actually we very actively take advice and consultancy from him, because he has so much experience, and also because he's been on that growing pain journey of when you have an idea and you've got a great business and you know it's good and it's doing all good stuff, but then there might be some teething issues and what have you. He's good, and his financial acumen is fantastic. So actually from that side of stuff, on an operational side of our business, he is amazing. Yeah, he's great.
And your dad has had his own sort of health issues, battles, hasn't he, more recently?
Yes, he has. So he over the years, he's had a number of issues that have caused him discomfort. He's had to have some major surgery. He had an aneurysm, for example. But I guess the most significant for us all, as well as him, was the fact that he experienced a stroke a few years back, which was pretty mega and had some pretty mega impact for him and for all of us.
And was your mum with him at the time? Yeah.
So when he had the stroke, we were all there. Now you talk about fate and the way that time works.
You mean you and all kids and everything?
Yeah, everybody. We were staying because it was just before my mum's 70th birthday, and we were in Bristol in preparation for her big party. And so we had arrived in Bristol. My dad had gone to watch the beloved Bristol City, to which he's a diehard fan. He'd gone to watch a Bristol City match, and actually some of the people that were with him at that match had said he'd been different, that they'd seen that he was a bit agitated and things weren't quite right.
Right.
But he came home from that game, and it was an evening game, and when he got back we had just gone to bed, so we didn't actually see him. But my mum called me, we were upstairs sleeping in a spare room, and said, Kate, you need to come down, and Dad was in their room, lying down.
But he was conscious?
Yeah, well, he was conscious, he was conscious, but he was behaving in a very strange way.
Right.
So if you didn't know him better, you would think that he'd just had a lot to drink, because he was just a bit all over the place, and he was poking his tongue out of his mouth in a strange direction, and things were sort of spasming and things were happening. Now, I know enough about stroke from my training to know that there's a test that you do around face seeing if there's changes in the face, and arms, so asking people to move their arms.
Did you do that then?
Yes, we did, and speech. So we were talking to him, and in talking to him, his speech wasn't clear, it was slurred, which again you could think actually could be somebody who'd had a lot to drink, but it was quite obvious, and because we knew him, we were like, this isn't right, it's very slurred. And then the key thing then is the time factor, which is that you've got to take a clock off the time, but then know that if you suspect somebody's having a stroke, it's calling the emergency services there and then.
So time is of the essence at that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what was happening to my dad's body is that he had a blood clot, which had travelled around his body and had travelled to his brain. That's what causes the stroke.
Right.
And what you have then is a small window to get that sorted. In other words, he has to be given some anti-clotting medication to break down that clot, to stop the impact of the stroke. And the outcome for somebody after a stroke is often determined by how quickly that initial medical intervention happens. So we called 999, and we had the paramedics were actually, and you sometimes hear about this in the news, they were actually at another call.
Right.
But because it was a stroke, it was prioritised for the paramedics to leave whatever they were dealing with and come to us as a more higher rated issue. They came to us. It was very obvious from the paramedics' first analysis that he was having a stroke. He was upstairs in a first floor bedroom, so they had to put him on a trolley walker down the stairs and take him to hospital. But he had administered that anti-clotting medication, I think it was within the hour. It was really, really quick. But even with that, because it was such a mega stroke, what happened for my dad is he lost all the feeling in the left side of his body, so his arm and his leg, and all the movement associated with that. He had some sensation, which is key, so they were able to test that he could feel things, but he has, since that stroke, had to go through the most rigorous physio and rehabilitation
to get the side of the body moving,
to get everything working again.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, get everything working again. So first of all, that was getting him to walk. Yeah. But then it was also around actually the fine motor skills, so being able to hold cutlery, hold a mug, carry a plate, that sort of stuff. And the other thing that's happened is it's quite significantly affected his balance. So it means that sometimes he might stumble or even sometimes fall because his balance isn't where it used to be. And we're a number of years on now. He's still having some really quite cutting edge physio. In fact, he's part of a big pilot scheme, which is in partnership with Stroke Association and all sorts of specialist bodies, where he wears a VR headset and he has to do gaming and use his left hand for gaming.
Almost exercising his brain.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Because it's retraining the as well as the muscles, because you have that muscle wastage, but it's also about the fact that it's retraining his brain to make those connections. So whereas I might look at a fork and go, I've got to pick that up with my left hand, and then I turn it and I start cutting my dinner, Dad's brain has to be retrained.
Right.
And it's pretty grim, I think is fair to say. You know, I think there's been periods of time for him where he's been hugely frustrated by things not doing what he needs them to do.
Well, and especially if you're a very capable
Absolutely.
or before you were very capable, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very active, mentally very active as well.
Absolutely. So that's been, and he also found initially that he was hugely tired as well, exhausted, because the whole pressure of having a stroke on the brain is exhausting for the body.
So would you say though, going back to this whole thing about being, you've got to be quick off the mark, you have to act quickly in terms of, ringing the emergency services, has that significantly improved his chances of recovery?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
okay.
So we know, and I think actually probably more from my dad as well, because he goes to a specialist clinic where he sees people who have had a stroke and are perhaps still in a wheelchair, or perhaps still not managing independent daily living at all, and actually probably won't be able to as a result of their stroke. You quite often hear sometimes that perhaps people have had a stroke when they've been asleep, so therefore it's not been until they've woken. Or people that are on their own. This time factor is so important.
Right.
And it has to be in our teaching at Mini First Aid. People have to recognise it, know what it's going to be like, know what their instincts should be, and also understand this time factor and how quickly you have to ring the emergency services, and what you're telling the emergency services as well, to make sure, like my dad, that you get that priority and you get that ambulance so that they can get you to hospital, so that they can start the treatment as quickly as possible.
And so was your dad in mind when you were sort of creating the
Absolutely.
course?
He'd kill me for it because he's a very...
he wanted it to be or not?
He
Mentioned?
absolutely wants it to be mentioned.
Right.
He's a huge, he now donates and fundraises to the Stroke Association, and he's taking part in all these pilots. He's going to speak at a conference soon about the fact that how his treatment has been for his stroke. So he's absolutely on board with education. It's just that it's about him, and he's a very selfless guy, and so he's like, it doesn't need to be about me, it needs to be for other people. And he's right, because actually he's had a very, very lucky escape in certain respects, and although his journey is tough and sometimes he gets very fed up, and we feel frustrated for him and gutted for my mum and all those things and all that trauma that went with it, actually his outcome has been very positive, and we just want that to be the case for more people. So stroke education, and there are different types of stroke. So I've just talked to you today about my dad's, and that it's understanding more about stroke and the differences, but that key thing, that fast mechanism, but also then how you get your emergency help.
So it's quite groundbreaking in a way, including that in a first aid course, because classically you think of the elements that would be included. You wouldn't necessarily think about stroke, would you? So Mini First Aid are kind of doing something a little bit...
That's right. I mean, you would sometimes see stroke referenced in one of the longer qualification courses, but generally bystander first aid, that bit that's just that I need the know-how, it's not necessarily always on a curriculum for a short course. And then there's also this perception that perhaps it only happens to the very elderly.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that.
So my dad wasn't even 70 when this happened, and we hear cases of much younger people experiencing stroke. So what we don't want to do is just make this assumption, it's only elderly people, because that's not the case at all. Yes, there's a higher prevalence, but actually recognising it in everybody and knowing that action to take. And so, this isn't just a personal agenda for Kate Ball to know that everything that's affected my family is sitting in a course. But I would also go as far to say we're a pretty regular family. And if we've had these two massive impacts on our life, my brother's cardiomyopathy and my dad's stroke, then that could be other families too. And so I feel like we have this obligation to provide this education for everybody in a really accessible way.
And just looking at sort of beyond the, what you're doing with the new adult awareness course, sort of your big dreams for Mini First Aid, because surely, you set up the business, it was a small business in 2014, and it's grown, and you've been on Dragon's Den, you've got 80 odd franchises, you train tens of thousands of children every week, never mind adults. Where do you want to take things in terms of first aid education and Mini First Aid?
Everybody, right? If you could say
just that small thing.
The number of people that say to me, "Okay, everyone should know this." Absolutely, everybody should know it. And there isn't a standard. It's a life thing that you have to do, you know, because as adults, we make decisions about what we learn about, you know, it's not a forced thing that you have to do. If it's part of your job, it may be, but for everybody else, what I want to do is raise it into their conscious awareness that this is something that they have to have. It's a life skill.
Yeah.
You know, think about it like driving a car perhaps, or knowing how to swim, or some of those things that people say, oh, you've just got to know how to do it. But I go as far as to say anything that you do in daily life, if you haven't got that knowledge, then you put you and potentially others around you at risk of the outcome not being as positive. So surely 2 hours of learning and then knowing what you're doing is just an investment that's just a no-brainer. You know, people should do it. But that's a challenge. That's a challenge because that's my viewpoint and I'm very passionate about it. And so I need to make sure that people get on that, you know, on board with me as well and go, yep, Kate, I agree with you. And we don't get much pushback, but I think it's raising it into that conscious awareness of people going, yeah, okay, that's me. And by making a course that's short, it means that people are more likely to do the training than perhaps somebody going, oh, I don't really have 2 days to do a big first aid course that lasts for 2 days.
That's the perception always, isn't it? That, oh, you hear someone, oh, I've got to do a first aid course at work, it's a day or it's 2 days. Not say that about a mini first aid course, I just mean there is definitely that perception.
It's a commitment.
Big undertaking.
It's a commitment. But also, when you're doing it for work, you're there as your work capacity and you're released from work. And not always, but most people are also on their paid time when they're there. But when you're giving up a piece of your own personal time, you've got to be really bought into why you're doing it. Yeah. And whether that's stroke, whether that's heart attack, whether that's burns, somebody choking, all those things just need 2 hours of your time to know what you're doing.
And ultimately to save
Put it in your life toolkit. You've got it. You know what you're doing.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. Please check out and subscribe to our social channels to keep up to date with all of our latest episodes. If you'd like to watch the full video podcast, head over to YouTube where you will be able to view the Family Health podcast in full footage. Or if you prefer to continue listening to us just on audio, please subscribe via your preferred podcast platform. If there are any topics that you would like us to discuss in the future, perhaps there's a family health issue that you would like to know more about, then please do get in touch. We would love to hear from you as we're planning for our second series. Please do let us know what you think about the topics we've covered so far as well. Thank you so much for listening to Family Health by Mini First Aid. I take Savlon Scar Prevention Gel everywhere with me so that I'm always prepared for the many little and sometimes bigger accidents that my kids encounter. Thank you again to Savlon Prevention Gel for sponsoring Series 1 of the Family Health by Mini First Aid podcast.